Chapter 16. As Eugene headed out to face the Minotaur, no hesitation or nervousness could be seen in his stride. Could it be because the Minotaur was so minor an opponent that such feelings weren't needed? In any case, Eugene had yet to train his mana, so the magic circle didn't change anything. Not being able to use mana while fighting against such a large monster was quite an inconvenient problem, but it wasn't enough of a cause for Eugene to hesitate. In his previous life, before he had ever learned the use of mana, he had fought countless trolls, ogres and such like. Compared to them, this Minotaur was nothing to be wary of. On top of the fact that it wasn't even a real monster, judging by its movements, it seemed to be weaker than an actual Minotaur. It definitely had its level lowered to be an appropriate opponent for children. I guess I'll just have to pay attention in case my weapon breaks. Until now, no matter how roughly he had used it, his sword hadn't even chipped, but now things were obviously different. Was it because they wanted to know if the participants were capable of responding flexibly to unexpected situations? Or perhaps it was because they wanted to see what kind of skills and talents they might be keeping in reserve? Whatever their reasons might be, this suited Eugene fine. After all, hadn't this given him the chance to see the main family eat crow, just as he'd planned? In fact, he could have succeeded in his plan to embarrass the main family just by defeating the Minotaur right away and ending the bloodline continuation ceremony all by himself. Still, thanks to a little patience, he had also gotten the chance to see Cyan humiliated. While all this proves that the patriarch is an upright guy, his son's personality was quite a mess. Before it was too late, Cyan needed to get that dogshit attitude beaten out of him, otherwise he would never get better. Eugene was convinced of the necessity of some physical education. Even if Gilead, the patriarch, had turned out to be an okay guy, his son was still a bastard. Moreover, since Cyan was already such a bastard at his age, he might become even more of a bastard going forward. As such, even if it was just for Gilead's sake, Cyan's character needed to be physically corrected, and Eugene was happy to volunteer. Although it might not be enough with just 1 or 2 beatings. Well, it wasn't like this was Eugene's responsibility. Gilead would probably take care of it once he found out the full scale of the problem. Eugene hummed in thought. He had already determined the range in which the Minotaur was set to react. Standing just outside that line, he stared at the Minotaur. Although Cyan had slashed it several times, the Minotaur seemed perfectly fine. If that's the case, then... Eugene smiled as he stepped forward. Just like that, he entered the Minotaur's reactionary range. How shall I go about defeating it? The Minotaur responded immediately. Moving its large body with surprising speed, it charged at Eugene. Unlike Desra and Cyan, Eugene did not rush forward, but he didn't move out of the Minotaur's range either. The Minotaur's large fist flew towards him. Before the attack had even been flung, Eugene had already predicted what course the attack would take. There were many clues to be seen on the Minotaur's giant body. From the way its fingers clenched to the movement of its elbows and shoulders, and even the twitching of its muscles, all of this could be used to deduce a prediction. Boom! The Minotaur's fist slamming into the ground overlapped with the movement of Eugene's sword. To strengthen the force of his slash, he counter-slashed the descending arm, aiming for the inside of the Minotaur's elbow. The joints where its skin folded were an inevitable weak point in its tough leather hide, and the tendons there weren't as thick as its arm muscles. Of course, it wasn't easy to time such a slash. However, Eugene made the cut look easy. He was familiar with wielding a sword in such a surgical manner from his previous life. Moreover, Eugene's current body was overwhelmingly superior to Hamel's body when it was his age. Right from birth, there had been an innate difference between the two. And Eugene had continued to refine and develop this difference over the course of several years. So he wasn't allowed to use mana? Why should that matter? Even without mana, his young body was extremely agile. Go! The Minotaur let out a roar. Although his elbow was too thick to have been cut through completely, the tendon there was very sensitive to pain because it was densely packed with nerves. Even if it wasn't completely severed, that was still enough to make the pain seem unbearable. Its huge arm muscles were now left dangling uselessly, and the Minotaur's reactions were slowed from shock. Without any hesitation, Eugene hopped onto the Minotaur's arm. Then he started to sprint. It was easy to run up the Minotaur's massive arm with his small child's body. Within moments, he had reached the Minotaur's shoulders. Of course, the Minotaur wasn't going to just stay still. It immediately twisted its body and swung its shoulders around as he ran up. However, Eugene was also experienced with running on unstable footing. And in the first place, this cheat body had been born with an innate sense of balance. Even with its body swaying randomly, Eugene continued to close in on the Minotaur's head until its huge horns were tossing through the air right in front of him. Pausing to get the timing right, Eugene reached out his hand. Smack! Eugene's hand caught the Minotaur's horn. Since he had been able to swing a sword completely wrapped in heavy sandbags, it was effortless for him to support his whole weight with just one arm. Eugene tightened his grip on the horn and pulled himself up. Just like that, he had climbed on top of the Minotaur's head. Grapha! The Minotaur raised its remaining mobile hand. It tried to catch Eugene, who was hanging from its head, but the speed with which Eugene thrust his sword was faster than its grasping fingers could clutch. Squelch! The long sword plunged into the Minotaur's ear. The sword stabbed in so deeply that it even managed to reach the Minotaur's semicircular canal. 1. The Minotaur's body soon started shaking violently as it lost its balance, and its wildly swinging hand couldn't even get close to touching Eugene. Then, unable to bear it any longer, the Minotaur fell down onto its tail. For his next move, Eugene pulled out his sword and thrust it back into the Minotaur's left eye. The Minotaur released a terrible scream of pain. Eugene twisted his deeply impaled sword a few times before drawing it back out. Then he stabbed with his sword once again, this time into its right eye. Although the Minotaur had squeezed its eye shut defensively, Eugene's sword pierced right through the thin eyelid. Gawa! Bang! The Minotaur's hand swung upwards, but it missed Eugene completely and slapped its own blameless forehead instead. Due to its rage and panic, it had put too much force into the blow. The Minotaur's head snapped backward abruptly, but this was a good opportunity for Eugene. He fell back down onto the Minotaur's shoulders, and thanks to the Minotaur's raised chin, Eugene had a clear line of sight to its throbbing carotid artery. Once, twice, thrice, Eugene focused all three of his swings onto one location. With the second blow, he neatly sliced through its leather hide, and with the third, he had reached the blood vessel. Then, with a few more blows on top of that, fush! Blood began spurting out violently. Eugene blocked the spray of blood with the shield on his left arm and continued to thrust his sword into the open wound. Soon the Minotaur fell silent as its life bled out of it. It continued the rest of its fall to the ground, slowly collapsing backward onto the cave floor. But before it could fall completely, Eugene lightly leaped off it and landed on the ground once more. Phew! Eugene sighed in satisfaction at a job well done. Although he had tried to block it with his shield, so much blood had sprayed out that both his hair and face had gotten drenched in it. Eugene roughly wiped off most of the blood before turning his head to face his audience, Cyan, Seal, and Desra, who were staring in his direction with their mouths wide open. Then, while grinning at Cyan specifically, Eugene pointed at the Minotaur's corpse. "You saw that, right?" Cyan mumbled blankly. "I killed it," Eugene boasted proudly. Cyan didn't know how to react. He knew that Eugene's words were meant to rile him up, but after seeing something like that occur right before his eyes, he just couldn't muster up any outrage. Cyan was sure that he definitely wasn't able to do what Eugene had just done. Visit for a better user experience. But what if he had been able to use sword light? If that had been the case, he was sure that he could have killed the Minotaur. However, he still wouldn't have been able to accomplish it as easily as Eugene had. Cyan was beginning to feel an unfamiliar emotion whenever his thoughts turned to center on this country bumpkin. It was similar to fear, but it brought with it an excitement in his chest that made it feel different from fear. The 13-year-old Cyan had yet to understand that this emotion was all. "Oh," Eugene released a small sigh of surprise as he looked down at his own body. The bloody smell had disappeared in an instant. The Minotaur's corpse that was lying right next to him, as well as the walls and the ceilings that had enclosed them from all sides, also started to disappear. His damp hair was dried back to a fluffy state as if it had never been wet in the first place, and the sword and the shield he was holding in his hands faded and then vanished into thin air. The bloodline continuation ceremony was over. Both Gilead and Lovelian were left speechless. Everything up to the point where Desra and Cyan had been defeated was something that they had predicted. In the first place, they had known that it wouldn't be an easy challenge for children to hunt the Minotaur. Wasn't that why Gilead had told them in advance that in this year's bloodline continuation ceremony, he wouldn't just be considering their individual performance, but their abilities to quickly make situational judgments and their cooperative spirit as well? He had wanted to see if they would retain the will to fight despite numerous setbacks. If the children had agreed to work together, it wasn't impossible for them to defeat the monster. And once they'd caught the Minotaur's attention, it was also possible to slowly draw it out of the magic circle's range. As long as the children didn't rush in impulsively, they could have tried out a few different methods until they finally succeeded, or at least, that was the way they had intended for the Minotaur to be defeated. Haha. Although his plans had been completely overturned, Gilead didn't feel any frustration. Instead, he burst out laughing with a broad smile on his face. "Isn't he amazing?" Gilead commented as he pointed to Eugene. "That kid, he's just a collateral descendant who hasn't even trained his mana, but he was able to defeat the Minotaur through sheer overwhelming skill." "That seems to be the case." Lovelian slowly picked up his jaw off the ground before replying. Everything in that labyrinth had been created by Lovelian, both the traps and the monsters. He hadn't made them too difficult so that they could match the children's levels. But that child named Eugene had broken through the labyrinth with much more ease than Lovelian had expected. Lovelian felt the need to ask, "That child, just what on earth is he?" "I don't know either," Gilead shook his head, still laughing. "That child's father is apparently named Gerhard Lionheart from the Jadal province. He's from a collateral line that's been separated from the main line for around 200 years now, but as far as I know, not a single member of that family has ever drawn any attention until now. But how could such an exceptional child come from such? Who knows? He says that he wasn't taught by his father or any other knight, but..." Gilead burst out laughing before he could finish the sentence. "But his potential is indescribable. They say that that child, Eugene, since he has first arrived at the main estate, has gone to the gymnasium every day to repeat the same harsh training daily. I've also sent a man to Jadal, and he reports that Eugene's extreme training is well known throughout the whole estate. Eugene was a child who had defeated his son in a duel, so Gilead couldn't help but have an interest in him. That was why he had sent a knight to the Lionheart family estate in Jadal to ask about Eugene. The man had reported that Eugene had first started going to the gymnasium every day when he turned 5, and when he turned 7 he started swinging a wooden sword with an iron core that had been steadily increasing in weight over time. That boy was born to be a warrior, and he also has an innate hard-working character that is worthy of such a physique. Even if it was just by unearthing such a jewel in the rough, this year's bloodline continuation ceremony will prove to be of great significance. But aren't you even the slightest bit displeased?" Lovelian asked in genuine curiosity. "My apologies if I cause any offense, but that child has outshone all of your own children, Lord Gilead. If there's already such a difference between them, once that child begins training his mana. And if he also happens to have an equally great talent for handling mana. If that happens to be the case, isn't that something to celebrate?" Gilead replied with a grin. "After all, doesn't that child's name happen to be Lionheart? That means the more extraordinary that boy is, the more he makes the name of Lionheart shine brightly. But what if that child reveals any ambitions for usurping the direct line?" Lovelion asked bluntly after being unable to think of a way to soften the blow. However, Gilead didn't feel at all offended by such a question. "That isn't something for me to be concerned about," Gilead answered sincerely. "Only the very best among the Lionhearts has the right to become the Lionheart Patriarch. If my children fail to keep the position of Patriarch, that would just mean that they were too weak to keep a hold of their birthright. If that was all the strength that they had to offer, they wouldn't deserve to be the Lionheart Patriarch in the first place." Lovelian pondered. "Of course, before I am the Patriarch, I am also their father. And as their father, I will guide my children to become the best that they can be. If that is still not enough, then it can't be helped." Gilead shrugged in defeat. "As an outsider, my apologies for bringing up something that wasn't my place to address." Lovelian nodded slowly in understanding and waved his hands as the labyrinth started to disappear. "However, Lord Gilead, as an old acquaintance, I feel that I must advise you. If at all possible, you must adopt that child." "Adoption?" Gilead asked in confusion. "Yes. A collateral descendant has finally overturned the main family in a bloodline continuation ceremony. That alone would make many of the Lionheart's collateral lines look down on the main family. If that happens, some of those dissatisfied with the current system may start to join forces." Gilead was silent for a moment. The Lionheart name had been passed down for over 300 years. A multitude of collateral lines had been born due to their inheritance practices. Each collateral family was founded by someone born with the bloodline of the direct line but had lost the competition to become the patriarch. There were definitely a few among these collateral lines who harbored dissatisfaction against the main family. The guardians are responsible for enforcing the family's laws, Gilead muttered with a bitter smile. While thoroughly forbidding any dynastic disputes, the Lionheart Guardians also suppressed any rebellious individuals. I thank you for your advice. As for an adoption, I think it's an attractive proposition, Gilead finished. To be honest, the boy was so outstanding that Gilead had wished Eugene was his own son. Also, it seemed like being adopted would be better for the child's future as well. If Eugene just returned to Jadal like this, the seditious families who plotted to rebel against the main family might try to contact him. And if that happened, that young child with a brilliant talent might even be kidnapped because of his gifts. If I keep the boy by my side, he could also be a great motivator to my children. The more he thought about it, the more appealing the idea was. And wouldn't it make for an incredible sight when the child's potential was allowed to fully bloom in the still distant future? At that time, if Eugene still proved to be overwhelmingly superior to the children of the main family, then not only would his adoption be good for the main family, but it would also be a happy event for the Lionhearts as a whole. Well, before that, the celebrations have to come first, Gilead mumbled as he turned his head. Both the labyrinth and the cave leading to it had disappeared. The children were looking at their surroundings with surprised expressions, having yet to understand their situation. Garjith, who had been lying on the floor, jumped to his feet with a gasp. Following his battle with the troll, he had started heading towards the center, but he had used up the last of his strength on the way there and had collapsed into slumber. However, as the magic dissipated, all of his injuries also disappeared. What about the boss monster? Garjith asked. It's dead, Desra spat out as she looked at Garjith with scornful eyes. Who killed it? He asked. I did, Eugene answered with a grin. 1. A sensory organ needed to regulate the balance and convey head position. Chapter 17. Before Gilead congratulated Eugene, his gaze lingered on his children for a moment. The eldest, Ued, hadn't even reached the center of the labyrinth. He had spent far too much time studying the various magical traps and monsters on his way there. Truthfully speaking, Gilead was dissatisfied with this result. He knew that his eldest son had had an overwhelming amount of interest in magic ever since he was young. Since this type of magic wasn't often encountered, it was understandable for Ued to be overcome with curiosity. However, for him to prioritize his own curiosity over displaying his talents during this vital bloodline continuation ceremony, Gilead couldn't help but feel disappointed, both as a patriarch and a father. On the other hand, Seal and Cyan's performances left him feeling quite satisfied. The twins had been able to make their way to the center without facing any great difficulty from the traps or the monsters. Although they couldn't defeat the Minotaur, that was just because the two children were still immature. And immaturity could be compensated for with experience. All of you showed a great performance, Gilead said as he stopped focusing solely on his children and addressed the remaining participants. He nodded his head sincerely as he smiled at everyone before continuing. From here, we were able to see everything as each of you faced the labyrinth. While we had expected it to be a challenging ordeal, all of you have done amazingly well. Thank you very much, the children awkwardly received the praise. Garjith had been staring at Eugene with surprised eyes, now quickly followed suit and bowed his head along with the others. Honestly, he was feeling a little embarrassed. After his fierce battle with the troll, he hadn't been able to make it to the center of the labyrinth. Desra and Cyan also felt similar embarrassment, but for slightly different reasons. Desra wasn't even able to mount a proper fight against the Minotaur, and Cyan had allowed himself to get flustered when his sword light failed to materialize, causing him to fight in a manner that even in his own opinion was lackluster. Eugene, Gilead said. Eugene, who had just been called out, was grinning. He was amused that Cyan's shoulders were drooping so heavily, although he was also feeling a little curious. Inside the labyrinth, he hadn't caught even a glimpse of Ued, the main family's eldest son. Though he had thought that Ued seemed to lack the expected skill and confidence for someone of his position, Eugene had never imagined that Ued wouldn't even be able to make it to the center of the maze. Perhaps that was why Ued was also slouching his shoulders and avoiding everyone's gazes. Although it seems funny for me to point out the obvious like this, you showed the best performance among all of the 9 children who participated in this year's bloodline continuation ceremony. Thank you very much, Eugene said while bowing his head in a humble fashion. He thought it would be more appealing to give off a modest impression than acting overly proud. The way you dealt with the traps and the monsters was impressively flawless, especially when you fought the troll head-on. Unlike the other children, you didn't even receive any minor injuries in the process. Gilead continued his praise. No way, Gargith exclaimed inwardly. Gilead's words made Gargith's shoulders tremble in shock. Did Eugene really not get injured at all while fighting that vicious troll? Gargith glanced at Eugene with a look of disbelief. How could he have done that when he's shorter and has fewer muscles than me? Gargith asked himself. He really was impressive. Gargith's thoughts gave way to sincere admiration for Eugene, but at the same time he also felt disappointed. If only he had the help of our family's revolutionary muscle growth agent, that poor body of his would also appear equally amazing, was Gargith's thought at this time. As he is now, I'd win in an arm wrestling contest. Gargith decided that he needed to challenge Eugene to an arm wrestling contest later. Truthfully, we expected all of you to be trapped in the labyrinth for at least 2 days, Lovelian said with a smile that didn't show any hint of embarrassment. Lovelian and Gilead had set reasonable expectations for the participants. After all, no matter how excellent they were, weren't they all still children younger than 16? Moreover, none of the children had ever been to a labyrinth in person. Lovelian had estimated that after placing various sorts of obstacles in their way, the children would have to wander the labyrinth for more than a day before they could break through. But as expected of the bloodline of the Great Vermouth, it seems that I greatly underestimated them. Of course, this fact didn't cause him any embarrassment or offense. After all, seeing these gemstones of talent sparkle brighter than imagined could only be a pleasant surprise. Apart from Eugene, everyone else should return to their rooms and rest. I would have liked to hold a grand banquet this evening. However, we didn't know that you would all emerge so quickly, and I'm afraid that we weren't able to prepare the banquet in advance. After informing the other children, Gilead turned to Eugene with a smile. As such, all of you can have a good rest today and we will hold the banquet tomorrow. As for Eugene, you can come with me. Yes, sir, Eugene acknowledged. Are you going to give him his reward right now? Seal asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. The underground treasure vault was a forbidden location, even to those who had inherited the blood of the main family. Only the patriarch was freely permitted to enter. From a young age, Seal had pestered her father for permission to visit the underground treasure vault with him, but even Gilead, who had such a soft spot for his daughter, wouldn't allow her to accompany him into the treasure vault even once. There's no reason to delay, so wouldn't it be better if he got to choose more quickly? Gilead said as he patted Seal on the head. Truthfully, Gilead was also curious to see which item Eugene would pick from the treasure vault. Lovelion personally escorted the other children back to their rooms, while Eugene and Gilead headed to the main family's mansion. They had quite a ways to go, so they both began thinking of bringing up something to talk about. You're quite skillful to be able to wield multiple weapons, commented Gilead, breaking the silence. Although he didn't look back at Eugene, thanks to the warmth in his voice, it was easy to guess his current expression. I'm not too bad, Eugene admitted. You're more than not bad. I saw your performance in the labyrinth and the way you wielded both your sword and your shield was truly adept. Moreover, didn't you use a spear to defeat Cyan and Desra? Gilead seemed to have heard the full story of Eugene's spar with Desra. This wasn't surprising as their spar had taken place in the open, where any of the annex's servants could have spectated it. Yes. I like the spear because it's a fun weapon to use, Eugene responded. And swords? Gilead prodded. Swords are fun as well. Apart from those, what other weapons do you enjoy using? I also like bows. Although shooting something from afar isn't that fun, hitting a target from a long distance can be exhilarating. Eugene tried to use an age-appropriate tone when speaking with Gilead. Truthfully, at the start of his new life, he hadn't felt like he would need to do something like this. Eugene had thought that it would be fine to just admit that he was reincarnated with the memories of his old life. However, the more he had thought about it, the more difficult he felt it would be to reveal the truth. If he were to admit that he used to be stupid Hamel, but he was now reincarnated as Vermouth's descendant, who would believe such a ridiculous confession without any proof? Also, he felt like it would be galling to admit that he had been reincarnated as a descendant of Vermouth with his own mouth. And it'd be just so embarrassing. It wouldn't be so bad if he had just admitted it from the beginning. But he had already been pretending to be a child for 13 years. If he revealed the truth at this point, it felt like all he would receive were gazes of pity. With Eugene's pride, it was absolutely impossible to welcome such pitying looks. It also seems like things would get troublesome. Not much was known about the journey of the hero and his companions from 300 years ago. After suddenly abandoning their subjugation of the remaining demon kings, the returning heroes' party hadn't revealed much about their reasons for their sudden change of plan or the details of their journey. Right to this day, that damn fairy tale was the most famous and reputable account of the hero's journey in the world. The stupid Hamel, as he was known in the fairy tale, had been reincarnated as the great Vermouth's descendant. If this fact were to get out, the world would be turned upside down. Eugene didn't want to deal with the flood of people coming in from every corner of the world to ask him about the facts of their journey. But that wasn't his only reason. Eugene. No. Hamel refused to tolerate the continued existence of the Demon Kings. This hate-filled conviction had not changed even after 300 years had passed. If somehow the two remaining Demon Kings in the Devildom of Helmuth were to learn of Hamel's reincarnation, they might begin moving behind the scenes. Those two had claimed complete devotion to a peaceful existence for hundreds of years and had even willingly opened Helmuth to tourism. But how would these Demon Kings, who had seemingly flipped their attitudes out of the blue, react to a living witness of their past atrocities? Eugene had given it a lot of thought, but it didn't seem like they would welcome him with open arms. Well, even if they did, it's not like Eugene would accept their favor. Although currently the weapon associated with our Lionheart family is the sword, it was a different story for our ancestor. There was a reason for the great Vermouth to be called the god of war and the master of all, said Gilead. As for why their family had been tied to the sword in the first place, it was all because of the holy sword, which had received the most acclaim among Vermouth's many weapons. It's a good thing for you to know how to wield a variety of weapons, especially since you find these various weapons fun to use. It could even be considered an innate gift. Thank you for your guidance, said Eugene. Of course, just because Vermouth was called by these titles, that doesn't mean he was the only one capable of using various weapons. I heard that Hamel was also able to wield several weapons, Eugene said after a brief pause. That's right. Although Vermouth was called the god of war, his companion Hamel was also a master warrior, second only to Vermouth, Gilead readily agreed. Ahem. But in the fairy tale I've read, he keeps getting called stupid Hamel. Ha. Well, that can't be helped. I've also read that fairy tale when I was young, but I've realized that it wouldn't be a very interesting tale without Hamel constantly getting into trouble. What do you think about Hamel? I'm not quite sure what you're asking, sir. I just want to hear your opinion. As for me, I've admired Hamel ever since I was young. Oh. Eugene quickly swallowed the unconscious exclamation he had almost made. May I ask why? Eugene asked, unable to leave the matter alone. Rather than the flawless Vermouth, I preferred Hamel's more humane character. Doesn't it often come up in the fairy tale? Hamel often felt inferior to Vermouth, but he never once allowed himself to be frustrated. But there were actually a lot of times I felt frustrated. Instead, he spared no effort to overcome his own perceived shortcomings. And in the end, he didn't care about his own safety but instead chose to sacrifice himself for his comrades. Even now, I respect Hamel more than I do my own ancestor, Vermouth. Hamel's portrayal was deliberately flanderized when in the fairy tale. It was because he was meant to serve as a simple lesson for young children. No matter how excellent the people around you are, don't be overly jealous of them. Rather than doing that, you should slowly try to improve yourself instead. I also admire Hamel, Eugene replied while having complex feelings about doing so. But the reason I use multiple weapons, well, it isn't because I want to become like Hamel or Vermouth or anything like that. Eugene felt the need to explain himself. Although he didn't know if Gilead accepted his explanation, Gilead nodded his head with a grin. As someone who isn't even a member of the main family, you will be the first person other than a patriarch to step foot into the family's treasure vault. Gilead changed the subject. While receiving astonished stares from the servants, the two headed down to the basement. Although the stairs leading from the mansion to the basement were very long, glowing spheres were hanging from the walls every so often, so it wasn't dark. Is it really okay for me to go down there? Eugene inquired. Of course it is. Didn't I promise you that you'll be allowed to pick whichever item you desire? I've already discussed this matter with the council of the family elders and obtained permission. As he said this, Gilead led the way down the stairs. The council. Eugene felt his mouth turn dry at the thought of them. The old lions of the Lionheart clan. The council was composed of the direct line's previous patriarchs and those from the collateral lines recognized as giants in their respective fields before they retired. May I ask what exactly is contained inside the treasure vault? It holds our family legacy which has built up over the past few hundred years, of course. Among all these items, there are even quite a few relics left behind by our ancestor, the Great Vermouth. Really? Then is the Holy Sword in there as well? It's there, but it's impossible for you to pick the Holy Sword. Gilead turned back to look at Eugene with a wry smile as if he had expected such a question. Because the Holy Sword is the symbol of the Lionheart clan, it is a sword that no one person can own. Therefore, it is only wielded during ceremonies such as the succession of the patriarch. Visit for a better user experience. Oh, came Eugene's disappointed murmur. Gilead continued, but that's not the only reason. Ever since the Great Vermouth, no one has been able to receive the recognition of the Holy Sword. Recognition? Rather than trying to explain it, it would be better for you to have a go at it yourself. Then you'll be able to understand what I'm talking about right away. At the bottom of the stairs stood an ornately decorated, massive door. Gilead held his hand up to the door after cutting his fingertips with his fingernails, causing red drops of blood to form on all his fingers. This will take a moment. With his blood-tipped fingers, Gilead reached for the doorknob. The doorknob had been sculpted in the shape of a lion's head with its mouth opened wide. The lion absorbed the drops of blood on Gilead's fingertips and closed its mouth, just as the engravings adorning the door began to wriggle. All of this was part of a rite to unlock the powerful barrier that had been set on the treasure vault using magic. Eugene took a few steps back and watched as the door began to move. Will you be entering with me, Patriarch? He asked. There's no need for that. I'll wait here, so just go in and choose whatever you want. The door opened fully. You won't be able to open this door from the inside. So once you've finished making your choice, knock loudly on the door. That will let me know when to open it, Gilead explained. If that's the case, wouldn't it be better for you to come in with me? Eugene asked. While I believe that it might be fun to watch as you pick something. If I go in with you, I may end up unconsciously influencing what item you pick, and I would rather respect your freedom of choice. Also, if I do go in with you, I feel that I might distract you. By saying all this, Gilead was showing his consideration for Eugene. Eugene smiled brightly and nodded his head. Although he had brought it up first, Eugene felt greatly excited that Gilead had decided not to go in with him. He wanted to get a close look at everything and have a poke at this and that. Truthfully speaking, if Gilead were to go in with him, Eugene would have to pay attention to his manners and avoid such conduct. But Patriarch, what's stopping me from hiding something on my person and attempting to come out with multiple items? This type of daring and impolite question was something that only a 13-year-old like Eugene would be allowed to ask. So Eugene made sure to look up at Gilead to show off his innocent eyes that were free of malice. Although he wasn't sure if his face truly managed to reflect his intentions, for now, he at least tried to contort his features into such an expression. That isn't something that is likely to happen now, is it? Gilead replied to his question with a smile that showed no displeasure. If that were to happen, I would be forced to scold you. And as these treasures are strictly guarded by magic, you would be caught as soon as you attempted to come out with something you shouldn't. Ha, Eugene laughed awkwardly. As expected, Eugene exclaimed inwardly without feeling any disappointment. Gilead offered, still, allow me to give you a piece of advice. Don't be in a rush and slowly take your time to choose a weapon that you'll be able to use for the rest of your life. In your case, rather than focusing on its performance, I believe that it would be better for you to choose something that catches your eye and suits you. Yes, sir. Gilead stepped out of the way, clearing the door to the treasure vault. Eugene nodded his head and approached the door with hesitant steps. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Before entering, Eugene turned and politely expressed his gratitude. Gilead smiled and patted Eugene on the shoulder. The thought of adopting Eugene was running through his mind. However, there was no need to bring up such a topic right now, as it wasn't a matter that should be rushed into hastily. As Eugene entered, the door to the treasure vault closed behind him. Once it did so, Eugene could finally take a deep breath and loosen his polite expression. Smiling too much had numbed his cheeks, so he patted them a few times before taking a long look around the treasure vault. Immediately after he had done so, a smile inadvertently spread across his face as he exclaimed, "Wow!" Vermouth's holy sword, the splendid golden sword from his memories, stood in the center of the treasure vault. With a grin, Eugene walked towards the center of the room. 1. The deliberate exaggeration of one aspect of a fictional character to the point where that one trait grows to encompass most of that character's personality. Chapter 18. The holy sword was still just as extraordinarily beautiful as when he had first seen it 300 years ago. It was a weapon that was impossible to consider as merely a sword used for cutting things. It was unknown what type of metal the sword was made from. According to the legends of the Holy Empire, the home of the Holy Sword, it was a sword that had been bestowed by God. It's surprising that the Holy Empire didn't try to take back the Holy Sword. Eugene circled around the Holy Sword, studying it from all angles. It had a beautiful scabbard and a long hilt that was best suited to being wielded with both hands. The blade itself wasn't visible, but Eugene clearly remembered just how beautifully and dazzlingly the Holy Sword shone when pulled free of its scabbard. He had to admit that he wanted it. Such a desire couldn't be helped. After all, this was a sword personally bestowed by a god. The Holy Sword had been sealed in the central temple of the Holy Empire for a long period of time, and it had accompanied them on their journey through the Devildom of Helmuth after recognizing Vermouth as its sole owner. Although Vermouth himself didn't end up using the Holy Sword all that often, this did not diminish the importance and value of the Holy Sword. This beautiful sword had cut down countless demons and had even pierced the heart of the first to be slain from Helmuth's 5 demon kings. Although after that it was almost exclusively used as a torch. When they defeated their first demon king, everyone was still immature. While recalling back to that time, Eugene reached his hand out to grab the Holy Sword. It wasn't like he had decided that he was going to be leaving with the Holy Sword, but for now he just wanted to hold it. Eugene grabbed the Holy Sword's hilt with his right hand. The feeling of wrapping his fingers around the hilt was amazing. Although it outwardly looked like a ceremonial sword that had absolutely no use in actual combat, apart from this fact, it had actually been expertly crafted. The Holy Sword's scabbard was embedded deep into the floor of the treasure vault. Eugene tried to forcefully draw the sword, but the scabbard would not release its hold on the blade. Eugene grabbed the sword with both hands and tried to pull it out once more using all his strength. "It's not working," he eventually admitted. The Holy Sword was immovable. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't pull it out. Just in case, Eugene bit the tip of his fingers to draw blood, then brushed his blood-stained fingertips on the hilt and the sheath of the Holy Sword. The blood that was smeared on the sword immediately vanished into thin air. He tried to draw the sword once again, but it still refused to be drawn. Just like Gilead said, "You'll know once you've had a go at it yourself." Gilead had meant that it was impossible to draw the sword. Eugene didn't waste more of his strength on it and cast away any regret. Even if he had managed to draw the sword, it wasn't like he would have been allowed to keep it. He took another look around. Sure enough, the vault contained a lot of different types of treasure. Besides weapons, there were also many jewels and accessories. With shining eyes, Eugene began his exploration. This was Asphalt, right? Several weapons caught his eye. One was an unusual sword hanging on a wall. The edge of its blade had jagged protrusions that looked like the fangs of a beast. This was the devouring sword Asphalt. It could devour whatever it cut to increase its own strength. At first glance, its actual power seemed difficult to judge, but Eugene was well aware of how broken this sword could be. It was a sword that could cut magic, a man-devouring sword. No matter how powerful the spell was in front of Asphalt, it would be worthless. Though only someone like Vermouth could use it to its full potential. It was only thanks to the fact that Vermouth was an excellent wizard in the first place that he was able to target a spell's weak point and crush it in a single blow. So despite feeling more attracted to it than he had with the Holy Sword, Eugene decided to set it aside for now. Besides this sword, several other familiar weapons had caught his eye. There's the Dragon's Spear Carbos. Although its cooldown was a bit long as you could compensate for that, it was a spear capable of unleashing an attack as powerful as a dragon's breath with a single thrust. The Storm Sword W. A sword imbued with the protection of the Wind Spirit King. The Thunderbolt Pernoa. A bow that shot bolts of lightning which could cross any distance to reach its target. The Phantom Rain Sword Javel. Visit for a better user experience. A sword that could create countless flying copies of itself when mana was inserted. And they've even got Geddon's shield. A deceptive shield that could divert any attack that came into contact with it into a different direction. These were all weapons that could turn the world on its head if they got out. Eugene shook his head as he clicked his tongue in amazement. So it wasn't just that they were Vermouth's descendants. By holding the ownership of so many treasures, the Lionheart clan could back up its status as a great family. Even a dragon would lose its mind in envy when it saw how much treasure had been collected in this vault. But is this really everything? Despite all that was here, Eugene still had his doubts. After all, this wasn't the entire range of weapons that he knew Vermouth had owned. He couldn't see the terrifying Moonlight Sword or the demonic spear he had really been coveting. The weapons here are only about half as good as those. This wasn't anything strange. After all, 300 years had passed. During this time, quite a few weapons may have left the treasure vault, never to return. Bastards. They must have known a good thing when they saw it and snatched up all the really cheap weapons. Eugene kept clicking his tongue as he shook his head. Although the weapons that were left in the treasure vault were all amazing, he still felt regret for the weapons that weren't there. As a result of their loss, he had to prepare himself to make a difficult choice. None of them would count as a waste for me to take, but there was nothing that really grabbed his desire. Since he was still young, he didn't have to worry about a lack of familiarity with it. No matter which weapon he chose, if he held on to it for a few years, he could slowly adapt to it until he could use it to his satisfaction. The easiest to deal with is WYD, but it was a sword that had been personally blessed by the Wind Spirit King. Just holding it in your hands would allow you to command the spirits of the wind and, of course, it enabled you to use spirit magic. Although it would be impossible for a while, as long as he kept accumulating enough mana, he would even be able to one day summon the Wind Spirit King himself. An advantage of this sword was that, unlike ordinary magic, spirit magic didn't consume a lot of the user's mana. Once the spirit was summoned, any further mana costs were taken care of by the spirit itself. And with it, there isn't a big demand for innate talent. Spirit magic was usually difficult to get into. If they weren't born with the trait that made a person attractive to spirits, even an excellent wizard wouldn't be able to summon a low-class spirit. However, if one held WE, there wasn't any need to worry about that, as it bypassed all the requirements for spirit magic. Javel is tricky to wield. Asphalt might be a good fit once I've learned some magic, but it would be hard to use it well for now. Pernoa, from what I recall, it consumes a whole lot of mana for each shot it makes. The dragon spear carbos didn't fit Eugene's tastes. As for Geddon's shield, it did have quite the cheat ability, but just like the Thunderbolt Pernoa, it consumed an enormous amount of mana each time. WYD is definitely the most convenient to use. Although he had come to this conclusion, Eugene didn't select it immediately. Instead, Eugene kept looking around the treasure vault with an aimless gait. In addition to these weapons, there were several other treasures that Vermouth had also used. These magic staffs. I'm not really sure how good they are. And there were quite a number of magic staffs at that. Since he was still young, he had thought about learning magic as well, but he didn't want to choose a focus without knowing anything about it. Oh. Having wandered here and there through the treasure vault, Eugene halted in his steps. His eyes widened in surprise as he looked at the inside corner of a shelf. He quickly walked over and reached into the corner. Lying there was a small necklace. Why is this here? Eugene held up the necklace and blinked in shock. It wasn't anything special. There was no great magic imbued into it, nor did it have any important symbolism. It was just an ordinary necklace filled with memories, for it was the necklace that Hamel had worn in his previous life. From a very, very long time ago, this necklace was the keepsake that had been left to Hamel after his parents were killed by monsters. Now that he had been reincarnated, Eugene didn't feel any lingering sadness for this tragedy from his previous life. All the sadness from that event had long since been converted into hate, after all, and Hamel had eventually taken revenge for their deaths with his own hands. Nevertheless, Hamel had continued to wear it around his neck until the day he died. It wasn't like there was any discomfort to be had from walking around with the necklace on, and there had never been any particular reason for him to take it off. He had expected that this necklace had been buried with him. Or at least that was how it should have been. Eugene stood there holding up the necklace for quite some time. His state of paralyzation was because he just couldn't understand what the necklace was doing here. Could Vermouth have retrieved my body from Helmuth? But none of the weapons that Hamel had wielded were stored in this treasure vault. The only thing in here that was in any way connected to Hamel was this worn-out necklace. Eugene snorted as his hand wrapped around the necklace. It looks like they didn't just forget about me. For some reason he had a bitter taste in his mouth. To someday kill all 5 of the Demon Kings, that was the promise that everyone had vowed to each other. But despite this, Vermouth, Molin, Sienna, and Anise, those 4 had made an oath of peace with the Demon Kings. Even though 300 years had passed since then, Helmuth and its 2 Demon Kings were still alive and well. Just what exactly did they swear in that oath? Even though you retrieved my belongings and laid them to rest here, all of you, especially you, Vermouth, just what were you thinking? Eugene couldn't put down the necklace. Since he had even gotten the chance to reincarnate, he didn't want to get too bogged down with his past life. Even so, no matter how faint, the attachments to his previous life still existed. This necklace had stirred up a number of feelings that Eugene had been trying to ignore. He suddenly had a thought. This necklace was an item that didn't belong here. It belonged to Hamel after all. He didn't want to resent Vermouth and his other comrades, since he believed that they must have had a reason for not being able to slay the remaining Demon Kings. The faithful Anise, the woman from his memories, was so cheeky and annoying that it was hard to believe she had become a saint, but her faith had been real. If even Anise had agreed to pull back at the last step, then they must have had an unavoidable reason for not killing the Demon Kings. It might have been that they lacked the strength to do so after I died. After all, the last 2 Demon Kings were terrifyingly strong. Although it embarrassed him to even think this idea to himself, he had to admit this was a possibility. What a pointless find, Eugene grumbled as he turned around. He still wanted one of the weapons, but he couldn't bear to leave this necklace, the keepsake belonging to Hamel, inside the Lionheart's treasure vault. That was his only reason. That is, Gilead exclaimed with a surprised expression as he opened the vault door. His surprise was because he had made various guesses for what Eugene might choose, but he had never imagined that Eugene would actually return from the treasure vault after choosing a completely ordinary necklace. It called to me, Eugene said with an awkward smile as he held up the necklace to display. Gilead blinked his surprise as he alternated between looking at Eugene and the necklace. Are you sure about this? Gilead asked. Yes, Eugene confirmed. But there should be many other more amazing treasures. As I'm too inexperienced, I felt that I wouldn't be able to handle them, Eugene recited his prepared excuse. However, even he found it hard to believe. Gilead felt increasingly confused as he thought about it. Of course, a child wouldn't be able to fully assess the values of the treasures within, but weren't there many weapons that appeared extraordinary just from their appearances? Could Eugene really have declined such treasures to pick a necklace like this? And what exactly is it? What made Gilead even more bewildered was that he did not recognize the necklace Eugene had carried out with him. Did the treasure vault really have a necklace like that? And of course, there were a lot of other accessories inside the vault that were all so expensive that just one could be exchanged for a whole castle. Gilead would have accepted and understood Eugene's excuse if he had chosen such a trinket. Since there was nothing that had caught Eugene's eye right at that moment, he could have chosen to take something that seemed expensive and valuable so that he could somehow put the funds from selling it to later use. Do you mind if I take a look at it for a moment? Gilead requested. Please go ahead. Eugene handed the necklace over with a nod of his head. As soon as Gilead received the necklace, he scanned it all over. But it was just a crudely made and worn-out necklace. No jewels were embedded, nor was the workmanship extraordinary. Even when he inserted his mana, there was no reaction in response. This was simply an ordinary and cheap necklace. Why was such a necklace inside the treasure vault? The latest studies are on website. The more he looked at it, the more Gilead failed to understand. He hesitated for a moment and then looked at Eugene. Please wait here for a moment, Gilead ordered. Yes, sir, Eugene replied with an unbothered expression. He understood why Gilead would feel so confused. Even in the privacy of his own thoughts, Eugene felt that choosing such a necklace was a very foolish decision. However, it couldn't be helped. Since he couldn't just leave it there, he had to bring it out with him. While letting out a curious hum, Gilead took the necklace and held it up to the treasure vault's door. Everything inside the vault, the honor and glory that the clan had accumulated over 300 years, had been recorded by the magic of the treasure vault. This is quite a mystery. After holding the necklace up to the lion on the doorknob, Gilead shook his head. This necklace isn't an item that has been registered by the treasure vault. What does that mean? Eugene asked. Exactly what I said. This isn't a treasure of the lion hearts. This is an item that shouldn't have been in there. But then why was it in there? That is why I said that is quite a mystery. I do not recall ever leaving this necklace inside there. Where did you find this? In the inside corner of a shelf. Could this item have been left behind by the previous patriarch? But if that was the case, then it should have been registered by the treasure vault's magic. It's possible that the previous patriarch may have just lost it inside there, Eugene offered as an explanation. Ha! Gilead involuntarily burst into laughter. My father, the previous patriarch, wasn't such a sloppy person. Nor was he the type of person who would play such a strange prank. Eugene was about to ask why Gilead didn't just ask the previous patriarch personally, but then he remembered and stopped himself. Gilead's father, the former patriarch, had already passed away long ago. In any case, do you still want to keep this necklace? Yes, I do. Why? No real reason, it's just, it calls to me. This necklace doesn't seem to be valuable. It doesn't have any enchantments either. So even if you sold it, you wouldn't even be able to buy a cheap longsword. That's exactly right, Eugene thought in agreement as he nodded his head. But I would still like to keep it, is what Eugene ended up saying. You really are quite special, Gilead commented. I've heard that a lot from my father ever since I was young. If you really want to keep this necklace, then it can't be helped. However, I can't let you have it right away. Since the origins of this item are unknown, I'll have to ask Lovelian to examine it. An examination? That's right. Although I've checked it myself, I don't really have any skill in magic. Just in case it does have some kind of enchantment, it feels like it would be better to have it looked over by a professional. So I can have it back once the examination is over? That's right, I'll even promise you that I'll return it once the results are in. After Gilead nodded his head, he was silent for a moment. About this necklace, it might have some kind of enchantment or it might just be an ordinary necklace without any special qualities. However, since it is clearly not an item that has been registered by the treasure vault, that means it shouldn't have been in there in the first place, Gilead said when he finally broke the silence. Yes, Eugene replied, unsure of where this was going. Although I really didn't think things could turn out like this. Eugene, strictly speaking, the item you brought back with you is not a treasure of the lion hearts. For a moment, Gilead hesitated. Would this really be allowed? There shouldn't be any problems with this, Gilead thought as he patted Eugene's shoulder with a wry smile. As that's the case, go back inside and only come out after you've picked something else. Eugene barely managed to restrain the exclamation of sheer surprise that he almost blurted out unconsciously and instead asked, Can I really? It's fine. After all, I promised you that if you were the first to defeat the Minotaur, you could go into the treasure vault and come out with whichever piece of treasure you desired. But Eugene, you didn't come out with a piece of a treasure, so go back in and return with whatever you like. Thank you so much. Eugene shouted in gratitude even as he thought to himself, I really can't believe that Gilead is Vermouth's descendant. Visit for a better user experience. Eugene bowed his head deeply towards Gilead even as he held back a laugh. He had never imagined that Gilead would show such flexibility by giving him another chance to pick up a piece of treasure. I've decided it's you, Eugene thought upon returning to the treasure vault. He grabbed WNYD without any hesitation. From now on you belong to me. As if it had read Eugene's mind, its silverish blue blade shone with a gleam. Chapter 19. Although he now owned WE, it was impossible for Eugene to summon a spirit immediately. No matter how little mana was consumed by spirit magic, it still required a certain minimum amount of mana in the first place. As Eugene had yet to start training his mana, not even a speck of mana could be found in his body. Even for Eugene, this was a problem that he couldn't help but be concerned about. The bloodline continuation ceremony was over. Now Eugene was free of any restrictions on wielding real swords, and he could even start training his mana. As descendants of the Great Vermouth, the Lionheart family possessed a mana training scripture far superior to any other scripture belonging to a martial family, knight, or mercenary. After all, it was a scripture developed 300 years ago and continually refined over that time. The Lionheart's collateral lines were all families that had been split off from the direct line, and their mana training scriptures also originated from there. But needless to say, only the foundations of their mana training scriptures bore any similarities to the main family's mana training scriptures. This caused the level of the collateral line's mana training scriptures to fall so low that they couldn't even be compared to the main families. This difference in quality further allowed the direct line to maintain its superiority over the collateral lines. As for our family's mana training scripture, although I haven't learned it yet, it should be nothing special. Eugene was sure of this fact. His family had already split off from the main family hundreds of years ago, and during all that time, no one from their bloodline had been able to improve their family's status. And my father's strength isn't all that great either. After he had turned 10, Eugene and his father had stopped their spars disguised as child's play. However, Eugene could easily recall Gerhard's thick belly, sluggish movements, and how Gerhard would lose his breath after only swinging his sword a few times. Gerhard had a habit of sighing that he didn't have any talent. As the bloodline continuation ceremony drew closer, the number of times his father had said something along those lines with a tearful expression on his face had only increased. Still, since it's based on the one from the main family, our mana training scripture shouldn't be that bad. If it really turned out to be so terrible that he couldn't put up with it, it wasn't like he didn't have any other means available to him. Although it might have been 300 years ago, hadn't he still been strong enough to become the hero's companion? The mana training scripture that he had learned during his previous life should still have some use in modern times. If even it proves insufficient, I can try mixing it with our family's training scripture. Since he had prior experience, it shouldn't be too difficult to do so. Eugene was confident of this. Not to mention that his current body's traits were so exceptional that the one from his previous life couldn't even compare to it. Even in my previous life, I graduated from using sword light immediately and went around waving sword force, so there's no way that I won't be able to catch up in my current body. Creating a layer of mana around your sword was called sword light. Sword force was a step above that. How long had it taken him to reach sword force in his previous life, again? It felt like he had been in his 20s. Eugene smacked his lips and fell into thought. The mana training scripture that Hamel had learned in his previous life was a cheap scripture commonly used by mercenaries. He had lost his hometown to a surprise invasion from monsters when he was only 12, so he had become a mercenary in order to get revenge. It was a past that he didn't really want to recollect. In any case, he had made quite a name for himself while diligently practicing that cheap training scripture. Of course, he didn't practice it as it was and had instead modified the scripture to fit himself. First he met Vermouth. Then he met Sienna, Anise and Molin. He had received all sorts of advice from them. In particular, Vermouth had given him various bits of guidance even though he had never asked for them, and as for Sienna, "You paid actual money for this garbage? Are you an idiot? Don't you think that your words are a bit harsh? Fool. Come here and sit down." "Why? If I tell you to sit, then just sit. Now then, from the beginning, show me how you practice that piece of trash you bought. Because I'm going to tear it apart and fix it for you." He had received a lot of help from her. He parted ways with Gilead at the main mansion. Gilead headed straight for Lovelian while Eugene returned to the annex. Desra, Gargith and Nina were waiting for him in the annex's gymnasium. "Show it to us." Desra burst out as soon as she saw Eugene. As she came leaping towards him, her eyes were plainly fixed on W, which was hanging from Eugene's waist. "Why didn't you choose a spear?" "It was my choice. But you're great with spears. Where the hell were you looking back in the labyrinth? Didn't you see that I'm great with a sword as well?" Desra put on a sulky expression at this answer. She really felt that he was rude and annoying, so she wanted to somehow refute his words. But as the image of Eugene defeating the Minotaur flashed through her head, she found it impossible to do so. Eugene definitely was just as good with using a sword as he was with wielding a spear. "It looks way too light," Gargith spoke up while rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "With your strength, a larger and heavier sword would have been a good fit. A weapon like a hammer or an axe would also have been good. Like I said, it was my choice. Well, it's not like it's going to be a bad weapon just because it's light. Since it's not just any weapon but one from the main family's treasure vault. So how about it?" "What do you mean, how about it?" Eugene asked. "I'm talking about our family's muscle growth supplement. Since the bloodline continuation ceremony is over, You should come back with me to my family's home. I'll talk you up to my father so that he'll provide you with as many muscle growth supplements as you need. No, I don't need any. It has the best effect if you take it during your growth period. If we add your barbaric training on top of that, you'll definitely start seeing results soon. No, wait, instead of training on your own, let's train together. Garjith wasn't just saying all this on a whim. He genuinely wanted to build a deep friendship with Eugene. After all, this was the first time in the history of the Lionheart clan that someone from the collateral lines had defeated those from the direct line during a bloodline continuation ceremony. After all, didn't you say that none of the knights back at your home in Jadal are able to teach you? However, our family has a lot of exceptionally skilled knights. Of course, the best among all of them is my father. So if you come with me, my father will also offer you guidance, tempted Garjith. It's fine, Eugene insisted. Instead of talking with that pig bastard, hurry up and draw your sword. Desra butted her way into their conversation. Nina, Eugene called out with a sigh as he gripped W's hilt. Go tell the chef to prepare some food for me. I've already given the order to do so, Nina replied. What about the bath water? I have arranged for that as well. Amazing job. While nodding his head in approval, Eugene drew W. The smooth metallic sound it gave off as it slid out of its scabbard made the corners of Eugene's lips twitch upwards. Eugene stared down at the thin, silvery blue length of the blade. Its edge was so sharp that it felt like one could cut themselves with even the slightest touch, and as long as one inserted mana, this sword would allow them to summon spirits of the wind. Eugene was well aware of how powerful this sword was. Even without wrapping it in sword light or sword force, if one had the support of a wind spirit, they could create a blade of wind around the sword. When the sword was swung in this state, almost anything could be cut as if it were just a piece of paper. Not only that, it could shoot blades of wind at a distant foe and could even be used to block most attacks. Of course, without being able to summon a spirit, he couldn't currently use these functions. Which sword is it? Desra asked with sparkling eyes. It's called WMYD, Eugene replied. The Patriarch told me that this sword is imbued with the protection of the Wind Spirit King. Once I've started training my mana, I might be able to summon spirits. Instead of relying on his own memories, Eugene relayed the explanation that he had received from Gilead. Desra pouted and looked at Eugene with eyes full of envy. It's an impressive sword, but there should have been a lot of spears even more impressive than that. I was sure you would choose a spear, Desra threw in her selfish opinion. Well, there were quite a lot of spears, Eugene teased. Hey, did you see that one? The dragon spear carbos. The one that shoots out a dragon's breath attack with just a single stab. They say that it can even wipe out a mountain. I don't know what it even looks like. What about the demon spear Luentos? Was it there? I like that spear the most. After all, it was the strongest one amongst all of the great Vermouth's weapons. Desra's eyes grew hazy with desire. Perhaps because she wielded spears as her primary weapon, she held a lot of fascination for Vermouth's spears. I've heard of Luentos as well. Wasn't that the spear used by the Demon King of Cruelty? Garjith said, nodding in appreciation. Remaining silent, Eugene returned WMYD to its sheath. The Demon King of Cruelty. Helmuth's second Demon King. Eugene could clearly recall just how terrifying and strong the Demon King of Cruelty had been. 300 years ago in the Devildom of Helmuth, there had been 5 Demon Kings. Ranked according to their strength. Number 1. The Demon King of Destruction. Number 2. The Demon King of Incarceration. Number 3. The Demon King of Fury. Number 4. The Demon King of Cruelty. Number 5. The Demon King of Carnage. Vermouth and his companions had begun their conquest with the weakest 5th-ranked Demon King. Eventually, Hamel had died in the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration. The demon spear Luentos was the spear used by the Demon King of Cruelty. After killing him, Vermouth became the spear's new master. Hamel had actually wanted to use that spear, but as its name suggested, the demon spear gave off such terrible demonic power that no one could actually use it, other than Vermouth that is. It's wrong to say that the demon spear Luentos is the strongest among all of the great Vermouth's weapons. The strongest one is, of course, the Annihilation Hammer Jigalath, Garjith declared after some thought. The Demon King of Cruelty was stronger than the Demon King of Carnage. Desra argued in favor of her choice. The ranks of the Demon Kings have nothing to do with the ranks of their weapons. Now that I think about it, the Annihilation Hammer was also missing, Eugene thought, tuning out the argument. Among all of Vermouth's weapons, the Annihilation Hammer and the Demon Spear were the only ones that had belonged to Demon Kings. It makes sense. Since those weapons are so foreboding, they can't just be left inside the treasure vault. Perhaps they were sealed somewhere else. In any case, those weapons cannot be used by anyone other than Vermouth. As they were weapons he had often coveted in his previous life, he still couldn't help but feel regret at not getting the chance to pick them. The Demon Spear is stronger. No, the Annihilation Hammer is stronger. Gargeth and Desra had started to quarrel childishly. Eugene shook his head as he looked at the two of them and headed to the center of the gymnasium. Nina followed after Eugene in a hurry. The dinner preparations should be finished soon, Nina reminded him. I'll be done soon as well, Eugene reassured her. Although he couldn't summon any spirits right now, even without its spirits, Wmwidi was a good sword. It's also the first real sword that I've held in this life. Perhaps due to this he was already feeling attached to it. Eugene pulled Wmwidi out of its sheath and ran his eyes down its blade. When he gently reached out and touched the flat of the blade, the chill of the metal sent a shiver up his spine. As he had expected, a true sword gave off a different feeling just from a touch. Even though it was much lighter than his iron-cored wooden sword, its nature as a weapon that could kill with a single slash proved the difference between it and a wooden sword. As I said, the Demon Spear is stronger. No, it's the Annihilation Hammer. Those two were still going strong. After looking at them with a pitying gaze, Eugene turned his focus back on We. Both the Demon Spear and the Annihilation Weapon were such great weapons that even he found it difficult to choose which of them was superior. However, if he had to choose the greatest out of all of Vermouth's weapons, Eugene would make that choice without any hesitation. It's the Moonlight Sword. It was pure destruction in the form of a sword. Even the Devildom of Helmuth had chosen to seal it away. Eugene remembered just how terrible that sword was. Although the Holy Sword was used to kill the 5th-ranked Demon King, it was rarely used in battle after Vermouth got his hands on the Moonlight Sword. Both the Demon King of Cruelty and the Demon King of Fury had been slain by the Moonlight Sword. Neither the Demon Spear nor the Annihilation Hammer, which Desra and Gargeth were making such a fuss about, could overcome the light of destruction emanated from the Moonlight Sword. Eugene set aside all thought of the Moonlight Sword and started to swing Swish. The sword gave off a soft glow as a slow swing of its blade cut the air itself apart. From the tips of his toes to the top of his head, Eugene felt a shudder of elation rush through his body. Wow! Nina softly exclaimed in admiration as Eugene slowly flowed through the movements of a sword dance. Even from the perspective of someone like Nina who had no skill with swords, Eugene's sword dance seemed extraordinary. Gargeth and Desra's childish quarrel was also cut short as the two turned to watch Eugene's sword dance with mesmerized eyes. It wasn't amazingly fast, nor were there any astonishing techniques mixed into his movements. However, the eerie gleam emanated by Wmwidi blended perfectly with each movement in Eugene's sword dance, flowing smoothly from one movement to the next without any interruption. I definitely have to get him to come back with me, Gargeth thought as he gulped down his astonishment. What should I say to get him to go with me? Shall I invite him to take a look around our home? It's still quite a long time until my birthday. Desra was also having similar thoughts. If only her birthday were closer, she would have been able to invite him to her birthday party as an excuse. But Desra's lips pouted in disappointment. It's an ordinary necklace, Lovelian said as he opened his eyes and handed the necklace he was holding back to Gilead. I have checked it thoroughly, but this item doesn't have any magic attached to it. Is that so? Although he tried to sound casual, these words caused Gilead to feel some embarrassment. It really turned out to be an ordinary necklace without any magic at all. In fact, even calling it an ordinary necklace was over the top. After all, wasn't it just a worthless, worn-out necklace? But then why on earth had such a necklace been included with the main family's treasures? Eugene had told him that the necklace had been buried deep in an inside corner of a shelf. Gilead had been in the treasure vault several times to search for this and that weapon, but he had never once seen such a necklace before. And the necklace wasn't even registered with the magic of the treasure vault in the first place. That meant someone else must have brought it in with them, but who? The late former patriarch hadn't been the type to play such meaningless pranks. If that were the case, what about his other ancestors? But that still left the question, what reason could they have had for even doing so? Was this necklace really inside the treasure vault? Lovelian checked. Yes, Gilead confirmed. Could that boy Eugene have been playing a prank on you? What reason could he have for doing so? From what I saw of him in the labyrinth, he has quite the cunning and mean-spirited side. Perhaps he snuck in with something that already belonged to him and picked that instead of something more expensive in order to leave a good impression on the patriarch. Lovelian cleared his throat and carefully started speaking. Honestly speaking, Lord Gilead, you must have felt at least somewhat pleasantly surprised when Eugene returned with such a worthless necklace instead of something priceless. I can't really deny that, Gilead admitted with a wry smile. However, isn't he just a 13-year-old child? I can't imagine that a boy like Eugene would be able to predict how I would feel about it and come up with a plan like this. It would have definitely been a huge risk to take. He was lucky that Lord Gilead was able to show such a generous mindset. With just a bit of carelessness, he could have also lost his chance at a guaranteed piece of treasure. Lovelian was only airing a few idle suspicions. Even he didn't really believe that Eugene could have come up with such a scheme. After pondering for a few moments longer, Lovelian held out his hand to Gilead. Allow me to check it just once more, Lovelian requested. Haven't you already finished all your scans? Gilead asked. I have confirmed that there is no magic hidden within the necklace. However, now that I've also gotten a little curious about its origins, I'd like to dig a little deeper into it. How do you mean to do so? How should I explain this? To put it simply, I'll read the memories of the necklace from when it was young. Lovelian continued speaking with a wry smile. Mana exists everywhere in this world. While it's impossible to communicate with mana directly, I know a spell that will allow me to read Mana's memory. It is a spell created by the esteemed teacher of our school, the wise Sienna. Lovelian was unable to hide the pride that he felt as he finished his explanation. That was just how amazing this spell and its creator were. In the history of magic, the only wizard to discover a way to interact with mana in such a manner was the wise Sienna. Then I'll be counting on you. Instead of sharing in Lovelian's admiration, Gilead simply handed the necklace back to him. While feeling disappointed in his heart that Gilead didn't seem to recognize the greatness of Sienna, Lovelian took the necklace. Then, focusing his concentration, he started to resonate with the mana of the necklace. Mana existed everywhere in the world. Most objects also contained some amount of mana. Even if it was too meager to exhibit any mystical effects, it was still possible to read the memory contained within the mana. A moan escaped from Lovelian's lips as he concentrated so hard sweat drops formed on his forehead. There really isn't anything. Seems to be an item from around 100 years ago. This is the capital. On the side of the street, it was sold there. Then, I can't read anything more from this point. It seems likely that magic of the treasure vault stopped the mana from recording any more memories. 100 years ago. Gilead trailed off. Around that time, yes. That meant this necklace went back several generations. Currently, there wasn't even anyone left from that time to ask about the origin of this necklace. In the end, he could only speculate that the patriarch from several generations ago had decided to set this up as a prank for some unknown reason. So, what are you going to do with this necklace? Lovelian asked. Since it doesn't have any magic imbued within, I'll just give it to that boy Eugene. After all, he wanted it so much that he even passed up the opportunity to choose a treasure, Gilead explained. There was no need to go that far. I guess the boy must have really liked it. Lovelian seemed perplexed. Well, there's no reason for why he shouldn't have it, Gilead replied with a smile. Lovelian returned the smile and handed back the necklace. Lovelian was the head of the Red Tower of Magic. However, even he could not discover that this necklace was the very necklace that Hamel had worn 300 years ago. The mana reading he had performed had managed to deceive Lovelian.